So welcome to Scripting for Interactivity. This is the first of our video lessons I'll be posting for Lesson 2, where we're going to go over some of the basics of scripting with JavaScript. So one of the things we like to call out is that JavaScript is not Java. They are two very different languages, and if you ever get them confused in front of a professional, you might find yourself the laughing stock of a few jokes. They couldn't be more different in terms of the kind of mindset of people who use them, and the way that they're built and other things like that. I just made a whole bunch of very broad statements that may become clearer as we get into more about how JavaScript works. But needless to say, there are programming fundamentals that are common between JavaScript and Java and many other programming languages. So part of what we're hoping to do here is give you a foundation that you could extend into other languages down the road if you so desired. But we're going to be looking at JavaScript as that foundation because it intersects a lot with what's going on in the web today and with what you might actually use when you build out HTML and CSS based web pages. So let's dive into the content here. Before we get into the slides and the handouts that go with them, though, I want to take a moment to talk to you about how you can add JavaScript to a page. So I'm going to switch over to Codio, and if you have clicked on the link provided in Moodle to this demonstration file, you ought to be able to code along with me if you'd like. So JavaScript is going to be attached to an HTML page so that it can run when this page loads. The most common thing we will do is put script at the bottom of a page like this. So I just put in a comment here in JavaScript, which we'll talk more about, but I could also declare a variable. Assigning the value of 2 to the variable green is probably not a very useful thing, but anyhow, there is some JavaScript code there. Last of all, so that we can see that this is working in the browser, I'm going to do something you'll see very often called logging to the console. And so when we type in console.log, we can pass in a message like this, or we can pass in variables. We can do all kinds of things with console log, and we'll talk about all those things in due time. But with that in place, let's preview this file. And nothing is really functional here. This button is actually kind of a joke. I have a feeling as you play with this, you'll have a hard time not clicking on that. Something strange about a nice green button with the words "click me." But you can see here down in the console, oh, by the way, I just did that without thinking about it, but I used the keyboard shortcut Command-Alt-I, which turns on the inspector. You can also right-click and choose Inspect. And you might be used to working in the Elements mode here. If you just switch to Console, this is where you can see a JavaScript console. I've tried to remember to put this fave icon in, but when I've forgotten to, Codio tends to yell at us about this. So don't worry about this little red mark, but normally red marks would be a problem. Right before that, you can see the good part, Hello World, which came out from JavaScript. All right, so the other thing we often do is create separate script files, something like script.js, and we can place our JavaScript stuff directly into a file like that. So I'm going to cut this content out and paste it in here. Same content, same stuff going on, but now it's in that separate file. So instead of putting it inside here, now I'm going to use this script tag instead to import script.js. So this would be just a normal path like what you're used to working with elsewhere. All right, with that said, we refresh, we should still get the very same thing, just to prove the point. I'm going to go over here and add a little bit more. Surprise. And now we see the new statement there as well. All right, good. So you've seen a little bit about how we actually, make use of JavaScript files inside of a page. And so now let's get into some of the specifics of how we actually work with this. We're going to have a couple placeholders for things that we'll be using throughout the course, and I've colored them in a particular way on these slides. And you'll see this coloring come back in each lesson. So one of the things that we have to talk about is syntax. That is rules for how to code properly in a given language. It's kind of like punctuation rules in in certain languages, the way you use commas and semicolons and parentheses and things like that in English, for example. But it goes beyond that in programming, but it certainly involves punctuation. So one of the things we deal with is a statement. This is a single line of code that contains an instruction to compute. And statements always end with a semicolon. Now, JavaScript is a little bit loose, and it can let you get away without a semicolon, but it is considered a best practice to put a semicolon as if to say, period, statement finished. So don't forget your semicolons. Another thing in terms of syntax is a code block. This is several lines of code grouped with curly braces. Worth pointing out that when we deal with curly braces, we often call them braces, as opposed to square brackets that we call brackets. So braces in this case can be used to group code, much like what you've seen with CSS, where we have an opening curly brace, several lines of code followed by a closing curly brace. So code block is the name for something grouped, and we'll use these lots of different ways in JavaScript. And then we have expressions. Expressions are statements that contain one or more values and operators that are that are computed or evaluated down to a single value. I realize that this, the wording here is not as fine-tuned as it could be, and that we should not have used the word statement there, because the statement is really something we covered in the first bullet as a very distinct thing. So let's say that instead of a statement, it is a series of fair code snippets. It's the kind of thing that's just easier to look at sometimes than to try to explain with words. But the bottom line is it's going to involve variables and operators, or values and operators, and what JavaScript always does is tries to reduce an expression down to a single value. So we will see all kinds of ways that this happens, and we'll keep coming back to it. So don't worry if that's a little bit ambiguous for now. All right, another major construct that we have are something called keywords. They are specific words that are part of the language, and therefore they're sort of reserved. We have a lot of flexibility to use variable names and things that whatever we'd like. You'll see that coming up, but there are a number of examples of keywords that signal something very specific to JavaScript. So I've highlighted here for you the var keyword. That's one that we deal with this week as we talk about how to declare variables. That var keyword is used in declaring variables. But there are a number of other examples provided after that. The Boolean values of true and false, the non-value values, I know, that's weird, of undefined and null, and we'll of course talk about a lot more later. So keywords are a thing. So speaking of the var keyword, another construct that we have, or concept to know about in terms of programming, is the concept of variables. These are custom labels that we create in order to label data that we've stored for reuse in a script. So we're going to have numbers that we're going to want to work with, such as calculating tax on an order in a shopping cart. We're going to have text values that we'll call strings, and we'll want to save little snippets of text values so that we can reuse those throughout our script, like a username. You know, maybe we want to drop the username on the page in several different places. These are examples of values that we might want to store with a label so that we can reuse those values anytime we want, without necessarily knowing exactly what's stored in those variables. They are declared the first time with the var keyword. You can see an example of this down at the bottom of the slide on the screen. We've declared the var, the variable myAge in that case. And along with these, you're going to want to follow your standard naming rules, like you did with naming files, with the exception that you cannot use hyphens in variable names. So any number, any letter, lowercase or uppercase, and casing does matter. So you want to be very certain that you're following, you're using consistent capitalization when you use variables. And you can use underscores to separate words, or use the camel case approach where you capitalize every new word instead of using a space. But you cannot use the hyphen-based separation for words, because hyphens are actually going to be treated as subtract operators. So you also have a few symbols that you can use. Underscore is one of those, but you can also use $sign in variable names, and you'll see that a lot when we start working with jQuery. Okay, so those are a few things about the naming rules. And last of all, we are usually going to be working with variables that hold values. So we have to at some point assign a value to a variable, and we do so with the assignment operator, the single equal sign. So the thing to get used to is to look at the very last line here on the page that begins with var, and read that as the variable myAge is assigned the value 31. Okay, did you catch that? I said is assigned the value 31. We want to break ourselves from the habit of saying myAge is equal to 31, because that is not the equal to operator. We will talk about the equal to operator another day, but this is not like math that you're used to, where that equal sign is used as equality. That's a different concept. This is the assignment. So we're basically saying take the value 31 and assign it to myAge, or store it in the variable myAge. All right, so the variable myAge is assigned the value 31. So here's the pattern to kind of tuck away. We're going to use the var keyword followed by a variable name. So we'd replace this marked 1 placeholder with the actual variable name. That first line there, all we've done is declared the variable, but it does not hold any value yet. Maybe we've just declared it, and we're going to later in the script actually assign a value to it. But the more common thing is the model that you see on the second sign there, where we declare a variable and assign a value at the same time. We have used the var keyword in both of these cases because it's the first time we have used this variable, and so we are formally declaring it with the var keyword. But note that after we have declared it, we do not have to use var every time we use it. So for example, look down at the bottom of this slide. In the set of codes that begin with the var keyword down there, there's the second line that says var height is assigned 5.65. All right, notice that on the very last line we have the variable shadow length is assigned 3.14 times height. We're going to learn about all those different operators there, but notice that I've used that height variable. So we're basically calculating the length of a shadow by taking the value assigned to height and multiplying it by 3.14. So we've reused that variable height, and we did not use that var keyword when we used it down there. That's totally fine. It's also totally acceptable for us to redefine variables after we have declared them, and we do not need to use the var keyword again in those cases. So I think before we move on, let's take a moment to step over and work out just a couple of examples here so you can get the idea. So back over in our demo file, we're going to go to our scripts, where you can see I had put in that var green silly thing. I'm going to wipe that out and start afresh. So let's say we're going to create a variable called name, and we're going to assign to it a text value or a string. Whenever we're using text values, we need to put them in quotes like this, which we'll talk about in lesson 3. So Phil Shanley is the name. All right, I could also declare a variable age, and at this time of recording this video, I'm approximately 33 years old. There you have it. So I've declared the variable age and assigned the value 33 to it. Well, if in the process of my script I want to kind of change the value of age, I can simply say age is assigned 34. Oh, look at that. I got a year older in just the matter of 2 lines of code. Who knew? So in this case, I already have declared the variable age, and down here I'm just redefining it. No problem. So let's see what this looks like. If I console log right here the value age, and down here I also console log age, I've saved, and I'm going to go back over to my browser and refresh. Notice that we see 33 and then later 34, because we changed the value of age from one to another. All right, so there's some very simple variable creations and assignments. Just to say a little bit more about naming variables. So my name, that is a legitimate variable. That is a legitimate variable. That is not a legitimate variable because I've used a hyphen instead of an underscore, and that's not allowed. All right, we can also use numbers, so we could say person 1, person 01, person 102, 1000, whoa, 10,002. Those are all just fine. And you'll also see sometimes we'll use the $sign to declare variables to kind of mark that they have jQuery being used, but discussion for another day. All right, so here we've declared a number of variables. Just to give you some examples, I'm going to wipe out everything but those first 2 lines, and we'll return to those in a moment. Notice that we had 2 different kinds of data here, numbers and text, which is what our next topic is. These are the next concept, that is, they are data types, specific kinds of values that we can assign and work with inside of JavaScript. So the one we're studying in this particular lesson is numbers, so that we can do math and all kinds of fun things like that. But there are a pretty small number of other data types, but lots of flexibility that we can do with those. So we also looked just a moment ago at strings. Those are text characters and things along those lines. But we also have arrays, objects, booleans, and some of the empty values. Next concept is that of operators. So you've seen one of these, the assignment operator. These are special symbols we use as we relate variables to each other or use them in operations. So we're going to look at a model for how we use operators in normal situations, but you have here a few categories of operators. The first 2 are those that we'll be covering this lesson, and then there's 2 other examples that we'll cover down the road. So we're looking at the assignment operators. That's one example of those is the single equal sign. That is the assignment operator, standard assignment operator. Then of course there's a whole bunch of mathematical operators for adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and other things like that. So here are some examples along with a model. So you're going to see often in the notes there are going to be these double underscores with a number in the middle or some other kind of thing. These are just meant to be placeholders that kind of provide a model or a formula, if you will. So this one is the standard expression formula where there will be a value on either side of an operator. So you've already seen this where we had variable name on the left, assignment operator in the middle, and a value such as a string or a number over on the right. A very normal thing. So the code is going to be working from left to right with respect to PEMDAS. Remember that from order of operations, product, exponent, multiply, divide, addition, subtraction. All right, so that's just an FYI. Here now we list the assignment operators. So you've already seen the first one, that is the assignment operator itself. But you also have the addition assignment operator, the subtraction assignment operator. We'll look at what those do in just a minute. And then the mathematical operators of addition, subtraction, multiply, divide. And then there's three others that may be a little bit more abstract right now. That fifth one there, the percent sign, is called the modulus, and that will give us the remainder of an attempt at doing division. So if we have one number on the left and another number on the right, such as 5 divided by, or 5 modulus 2, this would give us the remainder, which would be, do you know what is the remainder if you try to divide 5 by 2? The remainder is 1, because 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 left over, right? Okay, of course. Good. So the next two are going to be related to changing a number by 1, by a value of 1. So the double plus sign is called the increment operator, and that takes a value on the left and increments it by 1. This is an exception to the formula above where we just have a value on the left followed by the operator. And the result is that that value is incremented by 1. And the opposite happens with the very last one there. The double minus sign is the decrement operator, and it subtracts 1. All right, why we would use those, plenty of time to look at why on another day. So, for example, why would we want to do math? Well, perhaps we need to figure out the answer to a little problem. How old will I be when my son turns 21? Right, that's pretty simple. First, we need to know what? How old I am now? Well, if we need to know how old I am now, we'd need to know how old my son is right now, right? Why don't we start with how old was I when he was born? We start with how old I was when he was born, then we can just add 21 to it, right? So we could say age at son's birth is 26. And then age when son is 21 would be age at son's birth plus 21. You get it? All right, let's move over to Codio again and do a couple of examples with some different operators. So we're going to do a few mathematical examples. Let's create a few variables. Num1, you can assign as many things as you'd like at random. I'm just going to create a few numbers. Anybody know what the next number is going to be? Ding, 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 ding. So let's now do some math with these numbers. And we're just going to, so we could, for example, say num1 plus num2. Well, do you know what the answer is? Of course you do. You memorized that one a long time ago, right? Well, if we do this, we have done some math, and JavaScript has done that math. It's reduced this line to the solution, 12, right? But it's reduced it and then moved on, really. Nothing ever happened with the value that resulted from that. So what we'll often do when we do math is either output it to the log like this. So in this case, we're going to directly see that result in the browser, 12. All right? The other thing we might do is actually store it in a variable. Solution 1 is assigned the result of the calculation where we added num1 and num2. So now the result of that is stored in solution 1. So now we could say console log solution 1, and we would see 12 still. All right, so two different things that we might do with the outcome of some math like that. So let's try a few more. Solution 2, let's do num4 divided by num1. Boy, I don't know what 23 divided by 4 is. Do you? Well, let's log it and find out. Whoopsie. It's probably going to be something like 5 and some change. Yeah, 5.75. Well, you might have been able to do that math in your head. That one wasn't too bad. All right, what if we did for solution 3, let's use that modulus operator that we just learned about. Why don't we do num5 divided by, modulus num3. All right, so num5 contains the value 42, num3 contains the value 15. That's going to be 2 and some change, right? Ooh, and now I want to be logging solution 3. So I changed my log value there. There are 12 left over. Yeah, I was thinking of division. So when we divide 42 by 15, 15 goes into 42 2 times, right? 30. We can't quite get up to the third 15, which would be at 45. So 42 minus 30 is a remainder of 12, and that's what we saw in the log. All right, let's look quickly at the other two that we talked about a moment ago, the increment and the decrement operator. So we would do something like this, num2 increment end. Okay, all we've done is said add 1 to the variable num2, which currently contains the value 8. So what this line would resolve to is the value of 9. But again, we have not stored that anywhere or actually output it. So for example, we might go console log num2 ++. And here's a funny little thing. What you're actually seeing is the value of num2. So it shows that, and then later it increments it. So the incrementing happens after we've output the value. It's a funny little thing. So if you actually want to see the result, what you have to do is assign this to a variable. So num6 is going to be num2 increment. Funny, right? Now when we output num6, we see, well, that's weird. Num6 is assigned num2, or 8 increment, console log. All right, we'll call that anomaly that I just don't have the brain capacity to explain. Perhaps I'll think about it more and come back and explain to you why that's not happening. I'm sure it's something obvious I am overlooking. Okay, moving on though. We had a couple of assignment operators that we needed to talk about. They were the plus equals, that is the addition assignment operator, and the minus equals, the subtraction assignment operator. So with the addition assignment, we might do something like this. Let's say that we wanted to change num1 by a value of 3. So we might say num1 plus 3, right? That is changing this, or adding a value of 3 to it. Well, if we want to store the result in num1 all over again, essentially we want to change the value of num1 to be the existing value of num1 plus 3. Well, the existing value is 4, and when we add 3 to that, this resolves to 7. So when this side resolves, we have the value 7. And then 7 is being assigned to num1. So the result should be that num1 contains the value 7. Okay, that feels weird, doesn't it? Num1 is assigned num1 plus 3. Feels weird. Okay, it just does. So we could do the same thing in perhaps a little bit more readable fashion, like this. Num1 plus equals 3. It's the very same thing, so I'm going to remove that line. What we're doing is saying take the existing value of num1 and add 3 to it. Store the result right back into num1. So you should still see a 7 showing down here. Okay, why would we do that? Well, there are times where we're going to be kind of progressively adding on to a number. And so we can use the addition assignment operator. There's also the subtraction assignment, which just does the inverse, but we'll leave that for you to experiment with. All right, back to the slides. So we ran through this little example, and another construct now that we have to talk about is structures. We'll get into these a little later in the course. We're going to be working with those first few concepts a lot more before we'll get to these. But these are specific combinations of keywords and other characters that provide different possibilities in the language, such as conditional statements, loops, function definitions, object definitions, array definitions. There's all kinds of things, and these open up a whole lot of processing power. Last of all, comments are content that we place in our scripts that is not processed by the computer. These provide additional information or labels for our code. So you'll find that it's a good practice to leave comments in your code that either explain what you're doing or remind yourself of what you were trying to do, so that when you come back to it and you're looking at your code again, perhaps several days later or maybe even months later when you're on the job, these comments can help bring to memory what you were aiming to do in certain lines of code. And there's two different ways that we can do these. Single line using a double /, and so that comment ends when we hit a new line at the end of this comment. But if we want a comment to span multiple lines, then we use this syntax where we had /*, and then we can have a comment that spans as many lines as we like, and then a */ closes it. This is the same kind of comment that you might have seen used in actual CSS. So there are times when we want a comment to span multiple lines. There are also times where we just want a single line comment. All right, let's just look at a couple quick examples of those, just so you're fully informed. This is my single line. Ooh, Codio gives us those automatically. That's kind of nice. This is multi-line. And notice that Codio is automatically putting in new stars on each line. That's totally fine. It's kind of it's a standard way of doing multi-lines, that you're just kind of marking the beginning of each line as kind of continuing the comment. Not required though. All right, so this should have absolutely no bearing on our code. But another thing we often do with comments is to essentially hide a line of code. So if I took this line right here and put a comment in front of it, which by the way you can toggle a line of comments on or off with most code editors by clicking on the line and pressing Command /. That toggles the comment there. So if I comment out that line, notice now that num1 starts as 4, and then we don't change num1 anymore now that this line is commented out. So what we should see in the log should be just the value 4. All right, so you see how the code is essentially skipping this line because it's a comment. Now if I uncomment it, it's back into normal mode and we see the new value of 7. All right, folks, that does it for lesson 2. I hope you find this approach helpful and look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions or concerns as you dive into the corresponding exercise. Good luck.